with us tonight. We have Mr. Livingston, Ms. Shanahan, Ms. Smith, Mr. Keegan, and myself, John Kites, and we're still, Mr. Hewleman will not be joining us tonight, and I believe Ms. Young will be with us soon, and I will let you know when she hops on.
There she is.
And there she is. Let the record show Ms. Young has joined us.
Nice.
You guys aren't going to the convention. I'm sorry. I was on that convention call to just jump off.
Okay, welcome all. And now we're going to open up to public participation. Just a little, for those, if any, are on the call, if you have anything to speak to on the agenda, and just to make note that we have a public hearing on the industrial zone study. So if you're here for the industrial zone study, we'll have your opportunity to speak. If you would like to speak to the other two items on the agenda, this is your opportunity. If you please keep your comments under 3 minutes and give your name at the beginning, that would be very helpful to us. So Sabrina, do we have anyone to speak that has their hands raised?
If you would like to speak, please use the raise your hand function. If you're here for the industrial zone study, as John mentioned, you'll have your opportunity later on in the meeting. So just give it a couple seconds. Nobody has their hand raised as of right now.
Okay.
I think you're all set.
Okay, thank you, Sabrina. Okay, now we will close public participation and move on to administration. Item 1A, and that's the approval of the minutes of April 7th, 2022. Would someone like to move those minutes? Thank you, Ms. Smith. Any corrections before I call for a vote? Mr. Livingston, yes?
Just a couple, just on page 5 on the, I think it's the 4th full paragraph. It's just a sentence, this ends in the middle of it. Wrong page. It says, 4th full paragraph, it says, she said the small business and Main Street program request is for 150,000. She said any additional money will something. So I would just delete that second sentence, whatever that is, that half sentence. She said any additional money, whatever that is, delete it. And then also on page 5 and 6, Mr. Travers' name is misspelled a couple places. So somebody can just look at that. I mean, the next 2 paragraphs down, it says, Mr. Kites asked Mr. Tavares, and they do that again on the next page.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston. Any other corrections? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes as amended, please raise your hand and signify yes. Lisa, are you with us?
I wasn't here last week, so I was going to abstain.
Oh, got it. Okay, all right. So, so that's all in favor. All right. Noes, abstentions. Let the record show Ms. Shanahan has abstained. Minutes pass. Okay. Next up is new business, and that's the review of the industrial zone study. I thought it'd be best before the public hearing to kind of get a review of the industrial zone study before the public chimes in. I always find that's better because oftentimes than not, we have the public chime in without actually knowing the gist or the content of what's actually being spoken about or eventually voted on. So that'd be a good idea to have Steve give us an update of what the final draft or of the draft that's where it is now. So Steve, if you wouldn't mind just giving us your presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions for members of the committee.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody can see that, I'm assuming, before I get moving. I'll take that as a yes. Okay, good evening again, and thank you for giving me a few minutes tonight. So the industrial zone study was a recommendation that came out of the 2019 citywide plan. Kind of since I got here, in a few years now, the industrial zones has been under, seemed to like always under a lot of pressure for different things, whether it was let's reuse it for residential. There's issues with the contractor yards. There's a lot of conflicts around that zone. And I think that there are some historical reasons why, in terms of the way Norwalk had previously developed, the uses that were there. And so we're trying to kind of right size it for what we need going forward, and trying to reduce the conflicts that we are experiencing now and have had experience for a long time. Also, so some of the intent items from the plan, as I mentioned, to deal with these historic conflicts, also make sure there's adequate land available for the kind of future and desired commercial growth that we're going to need going forward. Identify the types of uses that are needed and ones that will aid in job growth. And look at ways through the regulations that, and maybe there are incentives that we can look at to, get the kind of development that we want in these areas, and not just, deal with what the current regulations are. So we put together a steering committee to help oversee the study. We got a consultant on board to, undertake that study, to work with the committee. As part of that, we did a lot of outreach in terms of public meetings. We did interviews, surveys, polling, the standard practice in terms of getting feedback on what, the concerns were, what the items that we needed to address are, and how best to, come up with the recommendations going forward. So the study was put together, and as part of that, city staff has kind of refined some of the concepts in there and worked on the proposed zoning. So that's kind of the stage we're at right now. The key findings that came out of the study were really to kind of simplify and clear up, so there are very understandable zoning classifications for the different types of industrial land uses, because there are many and they are varied. Have definitions to define those clearly. Look at the zoning map and define the correct boundaries for where these uses should be going forward. And also, we understand that sometimes as part of this correction, there are going to be instances where, properties become non-conforming in terms of the use that might be going on there now. So we try to put in incentives, so perhaps people can look at different alternatives for their site. So one of the recommendations was, because of the type of commercial industrial use that is seen, where there are areas that are seeing that activity, that there are requirements for higher ground floor bays. So the consultants recommended increasing the height and number of stories. Also said, your parking counts are too restrictive. So reduce that parking requirement for those uses. And also considered some supplementary uses to help monetize the ground floor commercial uses. Overall, there's a proposed 70% reduction in the amount of land that's zoned heavy industrial. But at the same time, we've increased the land where you can park commercial vehicles by about 45%. So what that means in a nutshell is, there are areas in the city, and we'll get into the maps in a little bit, particularly what is defined right now as restricted industrial, which really doesn't permit any of the commercial vehicles to park there. So we try to distinguish between earth processing uses and somebody who parks commercial vehicles. So if you have like a plumbing business and you have 5 trucks, you wouldn't be allowed to park in the restricted industrial now. But now we're kind of hoping we're opening up some different avenues and some different areas of the city where these uses can go. And these uses tend to not be ones that cause as many problems and conflicts with the neighborhoods. A recommendation that came out of this was to look at the industrial waterfront separately. Initially, we wanted to do this all as one package, but as we really started to dig into the waterfront part of it, it was really a much more complicated issue than we initially thought. So there's that separate study that's going on now. Monday night, there's the second public meeting on the plan, which is really the draft recommendations of the plan, and the consultant will shortly thereafter have the actual plan put together. And also the plan recommends, looking at the Norton site separately, but for now rezoning it to I-2 to provide some further protections on what's allowed there today. So this is kind of a Norwalk's, where you can do any kind of industrial uses in kind of a snapshot. So there were 3 main focus areas of the study in terms of land use on the industrial scale. One was up off of Main Ave, Perry Ave. Second one is East Norwalk, and then probably the largest concentration was in South Norwalk. So the map on the left kind of highlights those areas. Also of note is that you can do certain types of industrial uses right now in the business 2 zone, which kind of parallels the Route 1 corridor, both on the Darien and the Westport side. And we also allow boutique manufacturing, which is like smaller scale. If you think of like a brewery, for example, could be an example of that. That's also allowed in many of the other commercial zones. So the study came up with some ideas trying to try to classify these and then simplify the zoning district. So it looked at heavy industry, light industry, and the boutique manufacturing and where those could go. And boutique and artisan are kind of used interchangeably. So we kind of looked at some of the uses that were allowed in those zones now and tried to reduce the number of zones and clarify where things can go. So looking at the maps, so we're going to start from north to south, kind of how the map is oriented. The image on the left is the existing zoning. So right now, the use along Main Ave and off Perry Ave is business number 2. And business number 2 does allow some manufacturing in certain areas, but it's really restricted, and it also is regulated by existing uses. So it's not as permissive as it should be, where if you think about some of these streets like off of Gold Street and stuff, there are a lot of heavier uses that are occurring there now. So the study recommends rezoning those areas. There's 2 pockets, one just south of Buchanan Ave, and then this one I'm kind of calling off of Perry Ave to the industrial number 2 zone. And a little later on, I'm going to show you the uses allowed in those zones, and then the map will be on the screen so you could kick back to that. So hopefully the reference is clear. Second area is East Norwalk area. And as you may recall from when this area was rezoned to incorporate the East Norwalk TOD plan, along the railroad tracks running east-west is currently zone industrial 1. And that goes right down to the Norwalk River, where WPCA and DPW are. So the plan recommends rezoning the parcels that follow the railroad track from industrial 1 to industrial 2. So industrial 1 is the heaviest industrial use, whereas industrial 2 is the lighter industrial. And it also recommends for now putting the northern piece into that industrial 2 as well. Just to highlight on here, the Norwalk River, the parcels, as I mentioned, are currently in industrial 1. This plan makes no recommendations on changes to that area, pending changes to the, as part of the waterfront study, just so everyone's clear on that. I see a few people looking in really close. If the maps need to be blown up at all, are we okay? Okay, all right. This is more of a cleanup than anything else. The Wall Street area has some legacy industrial zone properties, kind of right off of the Route 1 corridor. And those were purposely left alone when this area was rezoned as part of the West Ave Wall Street plan in 2019. And the reason they were left alone was because that was just about the time when we were putting together the industrial zone study. So, working with the redevelopment agency at the time, we said, we're just going to leave those alone, and we understand you're going to address them at a later date. So we've had a couple of different consultants look at this already, and they're all kind of like, yeah, it doesn't make sense to keep these small little pockets of industrial zone because many of those properties aren't industrial users right now. It makes sense to consolidate them into the same zone as the West Ave Wall Street corridor, which will be the central business district. The area which is really seeing the most change is in South Norwalk. So South Norwalk right now has the largest concentration of industrial uses. The map on the left, again, the existing zoning, where the dark purple is the industrial 1 zoning, and I'm not sure what color that is, but it's like a light purplish color, is the restricted industrial zone. So the industrial zone 1 zone allows your heavy uses. That's where you have LaJoy's, that's where a lot of the big contractor yards are. A lot of uses that are, require big space, they, make noise. They're not always conducive to being right next to a residential use, but that's where they've been, their legacy uses. And a lot of these are kind of, needed within a community. It's just a question of one of the questions we grappled with the study is where should they be located and how big of an area should they be allowed to go in? So the map on the right is the recommendation for the South Norwalk area for rezoning. And there have been some changes as we've actually developed the zoning, which I'll touch on. So two big recommendations that I want to highlight on the map on the right. This darker color here, which is like a bluish purple, is the area proposed for Industrial 1, whereas this lighter area is proposed to go to Industrial 2. The restricted industrial zone is proposed to go away. And there are a lot of reasons for that, which I'll touch on more when we talk about the uses, but the restricted industrial area didn't really achieve its purpose over time. And the uses that are allowed there right now are pretty restrictive, and it's also just not seeing the type of uses that I think it was envisioned to see. But we'll touch on the uses in just a little bit. Zooming in, just to highlight the areas where we clarified things from the plan. This first area off of Ely Ave, in the plan, it was proposed to go into, let me just back up one second. Was proposed to go into industrial number 1. That was a mistake on my part solely in the mapping exercise. So we're going to correct that and leave it as the current neighborhood business zone, which lines up with the other areas, just to flag that for everybody's edification.
Steve, can you make that a little more clear? Do that again. So where is this on Ely Avenue?
It's
What
right
is this?
at the it's right at the intersection of Ely and Lexington. So right where, and this is where Descala's new development is across the train tracks over there. Is that, and then the train station's just to the north. So right on that kind of prominent sharp bend, if that makes more sense.
And that's going to remain what?
It's going to remain in the current neighborhood business zone. So no proposed change.
So it is mixed use, light industrial, commercial?
That's what it was proposed, but it's going to remain. The study had recommended the light industrial, but that was a mistake on my part. So we just wanted to correct that, and I just wanted to point that out.
And so is it staying heavy? I'm not understanding. What is it? So,
no, it's going to go to neighborhood business. So neighborhood business neighborhood business is consistent with what's there now. So you have small shops, and up above there's like apartments and those kind of things.
Okay.
Similar, this is just off of South Main Street and in Chestnut. This area was initially recommended to go into light industrial number 2, but in looking at that area more closely, it's pretty much all residential now. So that was a mistake again. So we've recommended to leave that under the existing zoning of neighborhood business. So that would just another clarification from the plan to.
This is confusing. I'm confused. This is confusing breaking this up this way. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I thought this was clear, but okay.
So this is Chestnut. Where's Larson? You're saying South Main and Larson. So where's?
Yeah. So South Main runs along right through here. This is South Main.
Okay. So that says Larson Street and South Main and Chestnut. So that whole area.
Yeah, this where it's kind of this like sort of this reverse L, if that makes sense, this piece.
But Steve, only parts on Chestnut, right?
Correct. Yeah, it wraps the corner right here.
Okay.
And the last area proposed for change from the plan was on Boughton Street. Boughton Street right now, the majority of it is zone industrial 1. In the middle, there's a middle little piece here that currently is zone residential. And the initial thought was it might make sense to rezone that to industrial 1 to provide a little more cohesion between the area of industrial 1 to the north and the area of industrial 1 to the south. But just kind of kicking it around with the committee and then the consultants and staff, again, everybody was like, well, it might make sense to leave that as residential and just not disrupt the flow, considering that across the street you have residential, and it might just make it for a more cohesive neighborhood. So we've reversed that piece. So there'll be no change there. Last area, just I want to flag on the map is this area off Rockland Road, which has a lot of heavy industrial users now. To the west, it really doesn't back up to any residential uses. So we felt it was appropriate that for that area to be into the industrial number 1 zone. So this chart on the right kind of shows industrial uses allowed under I-1 right now. That's the left-hand column, the top part being what's allowed by site plan approval, whereas the lower part is what's allowed by special permit. And on the right are the uses that are allowed, proposed to be allowed by a site plan versus special permit. So I think a few things that we did here just to kind of highlight some things. So there are certain things that were allowed that we felt, you know what, probably aren't in the best interest of the community as a whole. So we've removed them out, or we've moved them from site plan to special permit. So there's a little more restriction on them and a little more oversight on those. A couple of things like in there, I'll just highlight, like special permit use, for example, asphalt plants. We felt, you know what, that's really not in the best interest of the neighborhood to have an asphalt plant allowed in this area. So we recommended to remove that. We've recommended allowing helicopter landing sites, for example, and thought that would be a use that, if it was allowed, would be very disruptive to the neighborhood potentially. And I think those are kind of the major highlights. Another something else to point out on here, contractor yards would move to a special permit use under the proposed zoning versus being something that could be allowed by site plan approval. Any questions on that chart? I know I went through kind of quickly, and we can, there's another chart that shows some of the differences a little later on too.
So Steve, what is an example? I'm confused with better indoor rock crushing. What does that look like? What would that look like?
So there is one, at least one in the city now. And I believe that was approved on Meadow Street about 4 years ago. So as opposed to if you kind of think about a construction yard or you know, sometimes a large contractor yard, they'll bring in a rock crusher where they'll bring in lots of stone and they'll crush it up and break it down into aggregate or smaller components for use, and you know, different users might use for road base or something along those lines.
But it says indoor rock crushing. Is that something
Right.
they do indoors? That's
Exactly. So historically, when they're done outdoors, they're very loud and they can generate a lot of dust. So the commission said if you're going to, you know, use these, they wanted them to be indoors. So that was one of the items that they addressed. So what we've done is continue to allow that. It's already an allowed use in the zone now, and it's just proposed to continue as an allowed use going forward.
and how many of those types of industry could be in a 1 mile radius of a block in South Norwalk within the proposed changes?
So they would be allowed in any of this darker, I'm going to say bluish color, which I'm kind of highlighting here. That's where the proposed I-1 zone is and along Rockland. So if somebody proposed it on the site in one of those areas, and there are, just to kind of point out, I didn't get into detail on this, but these uses are all required to submit environmental reports along with their application. So they have to indicate how they're handling the noise, how they're handling the dust, any wastewater they generate. All those items need to be addressed as part of their permitting process.
So one of my concerns is, and I think I've mentioned this before, and I just feel the need to continue to keep it out there, is that, you know, one of the areas that we're proposing to keep as I-1 is in a very questionable location with a plan that the city is going to move forward with. So I'm concerned about a lot of these things that are allowable, because if I'm looking at the one special permit proposed in the right column, right, the right side column, all of these things could potentially be in South Norwalk.
Right, and I think if you look at on the chart on the left, those are already all allowed currently in South Norwalk. So we tried to, there are certain essential services that I think you need to make allowances for. It's not ideal that this is where they were located originally, but I think, that most of these are already there in one form or another. We tried to take out the ones that we felt going forward, even if they weren't there now, would be objectionable and potentially conflicting with other uses in the area. So that's what we tried to rectify. If there are specific parcels going forward that, the easiest part of the exercise, in my opinion, is changing the color on the map. So if you felt something should be industrial 1 versus industrial 2, it's pretty easy to clarify that. It's just getting the other mechanisms and uses correct is the part that we want to make sure we get right at the outset.
Well, Steve, if I can interrupt on that. We talked about this briefly before the meeting, and I know what Darlene's referring to. Of course, the proposed project. I mean, changing the color on the map. There's clearly got to be a process, right? You just don't go into the room and change the color on your computer. I mean,
it would be done as part of the public hearing process.
But you're not going to know until, based on your schedule, this looks like it's moving forward before we're going to know about that site.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think that's an issue whatsoever, because if the parcel in question is in the zone you don't want it in, if you now control that parcel, then you don't have to really worry about what the zone is underneath it.
But there may be abutting properties that are that color purple that we don't want to be purple.
Right. And we can, there's still a public process that has to occur. But if there were parcels that were identified that were in the best interest of the city going forward to be rezoned to something different, then we have to go through that process. But that's all in the underlying zoning now. So
I guess I'm just confused about the timing. Because if you're doing this, wouldn't it make sense what's your schedule on doing all this?
So the schedule going forward is, and Mr. Kites can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe this was going to come back to this committee at your June meeting. Then from there, I believe it will be forward to full council at their next available meeting, which I think is the middle of June. Assuming that schedule holds true, then we'll have our public hearing. When I say ours, the Planning and Zoning Commission will hold their public hearing probably at their following meeting. So the idea is to kind of, they'll have to approve it in 2 steps. They'll have to first adopt the amendment to the Plan of Conservation and Development to incorporate this study. And then once that's effective, then they'll adopt the changes to the zoning map. So that probably occurs at their first July meeting.
So my question would be, can we change that? Can we push that back a bit? I think that this deserves more public eyes on it. I know this process has taken some time, as it should, because these regs have not been changed in how long, Steve? A very long time. And so, whatever we come up with will be the thing that we're working with for the next 40, 50 years, or until someone decides to make some changes again or go through this process. But I do think that Chairman Kites, if we can, look at pushing this back a bit to allow for an additional public hearing.
Before you answer, Steve, if I could, and Darlene, if it's okay. Yeah, I have to agree with Darlene. I drove around, and I'm talking about South Norwalk here, and I commend you for all your work, but I drove around the Chestnut Street area, and I know the trucks are having a hard time driving on Chestnut Street as it is, but yet we're sort of promoting that as the industrial area. And I just wondered, to what extent has traffic been looked at when they did this study? Because it just doesn't work, is what I understand.
They didn't do a traffic study, but some of the areas for example, Boughton Street, with the recommendation to kind of change the zoning from the heavy industrial to the lighter industrial, was specifically flagged because of the narrowness of the road and the impacts that the trucks had on the road. So that was something the consultants flagged on their first site visit down to the city.
Well, as I
we also-
understand it, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the only other, we talked about getting trucks. We looked at a couple different options. Is there a way to get vehicles from other parts of South Norwalk to Martin Luther King Boulevard directly without going through neighborhoods and cutting through, narrow streets? And unfortunately, there wasn't a great path for that.
But doesn't that argue, instead of just doing it, but saying, well, maybe it doesn't make sense to have them there in the first place? I'm thinking about Chestnut Street, for example, with the schools there now. And I understand that's been an issue with the trucks. I won't name the company, but there have been issues with blocking traffic and so forth. And it just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, maybe I just don't understand it, but it doesn't make sense why we would have an industrial zone that has big trucks that have to go on these windy roads or blocking traffic. That doesn't make sense to me.
So
Yes,
all
they're
that
there now,
area
but-
now, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I know they're there now, but why perpetuate is my point.
Well, I don't think we're necessarily perpetuating it. I think that this area, if we're speaking up about this area in general, it's right now it's zoned industrial 1. So it's proposed to get zoned for industrial 2. So I think part of the rationale for the zone change as well is to also be able to provide incentives for them to do other things on their property besides. I don't think the intent of the plan was just not to deal with trucks and how do we deal with contract. That was one significant component, but another key component was what types of industries and businesses do we want to have in the city?
I get that, but you can't, they're not mutually exclusive, right? You can't have industry. You can't zone for industry if you can't have a way for people to get there, the trucks to get there. I don't understand that at all.
Well, that's this. How does any commercial activity get serviced by trucks? Every grocery store in town gets multiple truck deliveries a day. Every commercial business, actually right now, every residential business is getting multiple, some kind of commercial vehicle.
All I'd say is go down and look at it. But just an aside, do you have, can you provide us with a list or a chart of all the businesses that will be non-conforming in this area? And I ask that because, well, I'll ask you directly, is the Smilo Center going to be non-conforming now?
Let's see. I'd have to look back and see how we actually classified them with their permit. Those kind of things. If we felt that there was a use that, we were worried we're going to make non-conforming, I think we could put that back in. That definitely wasn't the intent by any stretch.
Well, again, that raises the point that maybe we just need a little more time.
I think we do. And Tom, to your point, I think I've talked about the traffic in the area quite a bit. And I think it's something to hear someone talk about it, but it's another thing to actually go down and drive through the streets and see what's actually happening. We keep talking about the industry that was in South Norwalk years ago, and a lot of them were factory, I believe. You might have had some like Contractor Yards or that sort of thing. But now what is happening is that it seems as if homes on properties have either torn down their homes or lifted them up or used their backyards as contractor yards. And I think that's just a huge issue. And I think we need to say, when is it enough? And then for me, if we can answer that question honestly, then what is it that we expect South Norwalk to look like moving forward? Is there a certain area that's going to be designated the contractor yard site while everything, while we push the boundaries of development to where we're not going to go any farther? I just don't understand, but I think there's an issue, and I think we need to absolutely bring this in front of the public for comment.
Well, I think that's what we're doing tonight. And
in addition to this, I think I've heard from some that this seemed to have come kind of quickly. but I know it was published, but I think there's nothing wrong with more opportunity to have voices heard around this.
Okay.
If I can just add, I think, the other project that we're talking about, I think we need, specifically for that, we need a little more time to know where that project is and then what we're dealing with. And just that is a good reason to slow down a little bit.
Does anybody know a time frame when that is going to be at least settled? And
June.
okay, I mean, I don't think that changes that's fine. I don't think that significantly alters the schedule that I was going through before.
I mean, Steve, I think it's great all you've done. I just think that there's just enough questions I'm hearing, and Darlene's raising a lot of good ones. I just think we just need to look at it a little more carefully.
Well,
I mean, I'm looking at this map you got up now. I'm not referring to the other areas, but again, just based on my quick driving around and talking to people, some of it doesn't make sense to me.
well, maybe I'm just not understanding. I'm just not sure what part doesn't make sense.
Well, like what I talked about, like I know we've just talked about it, the trucks. I don't understand if the trucks can't use the roads safely, they're blocking traffic, why are we keeping the zoning the way it is that perpetuates those trucks? I don't get it. I know you need trucks for different things, but you don't need 18 wheelers.
Yeah, I maybe we could chat offline because I'm just
okay,
not.
That's fine.
I'm just not getting how what's proposed would perpetuate that. That's maybe I'm just.
We'll look at Chestnut. That's what I'm talking about particularly.
Okay, I'm happy to follow up afterwards.
Okay, Steve, are you going through your presentation? You still have more to go?
Yeah, I got a little bit more to go.
Okay.
So the other change that was pretty significant proposed was, and I touched on this a little bit before, was the change from restricted industrial to what's proposed in the I2 zone. Significant areas of restricted industrial right now. One is up at the Norton site, and the other area is really the Martin Luther King Boulevard, and there's also another area in South Norwalk. So you can see on the left, the restricted industrial area, it doesn't allow for very much in the way of uses. And I think that's kind of seen in like kind of the pattern of developments that's there. I've heard a lot of people saying it would be great to have more truck access in and out of there. That's a better spot to have the commercial vehicles. So that's one of the things that was put into the plan, was allowing that area to kind of open up and allow some different uses through there to maybe expand on what's available throughout that corridor. So that's one of the things we did. And the proposed I2 zone is meant to be kind of a transition and a little bit of a buffer from where you have either like a mixed use or neighborhood business zone or residential, between that and then the heavy industrial uses. This chart here kind of highlights the differences, because the other aspect of this is the folks that, and I have a slide that shows the contractor yards that become non-conforming as a result of this. So this chart shows the allowed uses in I1 versus what's allowed in I2. So some of the uses that, and I touched on this a little bit, that we pulled out from I1 to try to make it, remove some maybe higher, more objectionable uses and allow for uses and incentives that maybe are something hopefully a little more on the job creation side and are less conflicting with the other uses in the area. So those are kind of highlighted on the left and as well on the right.
Steve, do we have any say on the types of commercial vehicles that can be stored in the I2 under the special permitting?
Yeah, that's what's under discussion now. The Planning and Zoning Commission, the last time they talked about this was a few meetings ago, but they talked about potentially, they talked about both sides of it. They talked about freeing it up a little bit to allow for some larger commercial vehicles, so long as they're not doing any of the earthwork and they're just storing the vehicles there. But they also talked about, if you do that and allow the heavier trucks in there, then what are the impacts for that? Maybe that's picking up on what Mr. Livingston was saying in terms of the size of vehicles, air quality issues, noise, those kind of things. So that's something that can be adjusted one way or the other, whatever everybody's preferences. So just part of the analysis that the consultant team went through, they looked at, and I mentioned before, the increased building height and the type of building typology they're seeing. And these are some examples of what they're seeing in other areas. And, some of these are larger communities in Norwalk, but other ones are not necessarily. So these are something we're thinking about conceptually, where you have that ground floor high bay commercial use, and up above it are different uses that can be either supportive of the use below, or could be independent but help monetize the property. So those are some examples. And they went through some exercises where they did some test fits on the types of buildings to see how they could fit on some, hypothetical sites in the city. And we pulled out a few properties where there are existing commercial properties now, and they looked at what was there in terms of the lot size, and they tried to, did some analysis of, well, if we had this type of use come in, what would that generate in terms of building size, and what are the kind of jobs that we could see potentially as a result of that if these come to fruition. Obviously, the whole area is not going to develop in this pattern, and if it does, it's going to happen over a long period of time, but it's just part of the exercise that we went through in the analysis stage. Again, and this is just part of that analysis where they take that site, they put the building typology on it, they park the site in terms of what they think could be needed in terms of truck access, but also in terms of employee parking in order to make the site fully functional. Again, and here's just a larger example of that. And the last bit I'm going to touch on is the contractor yards and the commercial vehicles, which has been a big part of the overall planning discussion, obviously a big part of our discussion tonight. So right now in the existing zoning, there is about 500 acres within the industrial 1 and industrial 2. And as I mentioned, some of the business zones do allow some industrial use, but I really didn't include that as part of the analysis. So there is a 70% proposed reduction in the heaviest of the industrial zones. But we've also, we hear the cries on the other end, because there is a need to park these contractor vehicles. There is a need. And to Ms. Young's point, they're parked in a lot of backyards. Many of those are not there legally. We're hoping we can provide places where they can park, where they're not illegal, where there's potential for the, like you have a condo association that has these commercial vehicle parks where they can all have a small yard, or they can have a small building where they can store their materials. That would be something that would hopefully, not be so expensive, but allow them to get out of the residential neighborhoods and park in different areas. To offset some of these changes and hopefully incentivize them to do something else, as I mentioned, we've increased the building height, lowered the parking demand. We've allowed boutique and light manufacturing more areas, and also loosened up the restriction on what has to go to the commission versus what we can approve over the counter. So right now, the current threshold is 20,000 square feet for a building. And now we've bumped that up to 50, because that just, I think, frees up the commission's workload and also allows something more in scale with what's happening today. So, and I have a map that'll show you that. So proposed, there's about 20 contractor yards that will become non-conforming as a result of these changes. And those are the properties that are shown with that very light blue highlight on this map. Just some kind of significant ones to point out. This large one down here is the Grasso property. They've kind of moved away from contractor yards. There are some contractor uses on there, but for the most part, it's not that same kind of earth processing yard, which the folks at Village Creek have complained about for years. That's kind of gone away. This parcel over here is actually transitioning to something else from an earth processing yard. So that's something else that will kind of over time be less disruptive than the neighbors. There are some contractor yards that will become non-conforming that are well behaved and are good citizens for Norwalk. But it's important to point out, and I've had numerous conversations about this, is that even if these contractor yards become non-conforming, they can continue to do exactly what they're doing today. Even if they sell the business, they can remain there in perpetuity as long as they maintain that use. The city has no legal right, unless they go in and try to take the property, to eliminate that use. It's allowed to remain, going forward. But what we tried to do was, over time, hopefully in these areas, they'll change use, or they'll sell the property and they'll turn into something that is more job orientated, and also is something that's less objectionable to the neighbors in terms of what's going on at the site. As we talked about, there's going to be uses that always require some kind of truck, whether it's a delivery truck, some kind of access is going to be needed to these areas. And that's kind of the way the economy shifted over time anyway. But we're hoping that the individual uses will be less objectionable as we go forward.
So Steve, can you go back to that for a moment, please?
Yep.
There's the next largest band of the property outlined in blue.
Which point me in a
Oh
direction.
God, I can't even tell what street that is.
We can go north, south, east, and west, or left, right, top, bottom.
On the left. Yep, right there. So where is that?
I believe that's off of like Tito Court area through there. If you drive back through there.
So that's okay. Okay.
San
So
Vincenzo's.
okay, that's what that is. So I'm just going to say this here. That is the creation of an industrial park in the heart of South Norwalk. There are 5, almost maybe even 6 contractor yards in a row. And that cuts into those streets that are very narrow. That's a real issue. But
So
I'm
so those parcels, and what we're talking about is right through here.
Mhm.
They're actually so those are our legal contractor yards today. They would become legally non-conforming with the proposed change. So hopefully over time they would change into something else. As I mentioned, we can't kick them out. That's not, we don't have the legal right to do that. But over time, we're hoping we provide an opportunity for them to do something that's more in keeping with the neighborhood.
How much of this is grandfathered in? Because I know we say that a lot. We've said that prior, but I haven't heard too much of that now. So
if the zoning changes go through, all of these properties with this bluish outline would all become grandfathered uses. I mean, there is nothing, even if we change the zone to residential, there's nothing we could do to remove them. They're legally allowed to stay there. And I think it's important to note that, speaking to the other part of the crowd, who they are allowed to operate that business as they currently are, even if we change the zoning. That's like the one, I would say, almost plus side to a contractor yard, is that if it changes to something else, it's not that difficult to change to something else, because it's basically a lot of open land where they're storing materials, whether they're in bins or however they're there. It's just a matter of moving that material off site. So it's not like it's fully developed with buildings and they have to rip all that down, and it's more infrastructure and more cost to make those changes.
So are there any changes in the study moving forward that is going to deal with hours of operation and all of those sorts of things?
All those would be governed by the noise ordinance as it currently exists now. There are, like in some of the language, making sure that the buffers are adequate, because that sometimes that's an issue. Making sure that they, and again, some of this does come back to enforcement in terms of making sure that, the pile heights don't exceed what's permitted, that if the pile's not in use, that the pile's covered up, that they're watering the site to, keep the dust down, and those kind of things. And I just wanted to close with just an example of a couple contractor yards that hit that half-acre threshold that's mentioned in the study. So here are 2 properties on Chestnut. which are currently contractor yards, which is 54 and 56. Here's just a kind of a blow up view of where they're at. Here is an aerial picture of 54, which has a lot of trucks and stuff stored on there. This is kind of a street view of what it looks like. There's 56, which is similar, but also stores materials, and again, stores trucks. So going forward, if there was something that came into the zone, they couldn't have any of these materials on there. They could be allowed to store those commercial vehicles there, provided they were screened. So obviously, if you're going by, you're not going to just see open fence and whatever's being stored or parked behind there. That's kind of the idea with some of the changes we're putting forward. So we kind of talked on this a little bit. The next steps, sounds like you want to keep this open until June, which is fine. I mean, it doesn't really alter the Planning and Zoning Commission timeline too much. I can always push it back a meeting or two. It doesn't really alter things. So the properties in question in terms of that the city's looking at and that gets settled, then we can adjust the mapping going forward. And if you wanted to talk about some further areas up on Chestnut Street and what you think could or should be there, I'm happy to have that discussion as well. And I think that's it for me.
Steve, so where are we with the moratorium? I know you had mentioned it to me a week or so ago. I can't remember.
Right. So the moratorium technically is going to expire in mid-June, but the commission's going to extend that through September.
Okay.
So I think that covers the intent either way.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else before we move on to a public hearing? No. Okay, sounds like, yeah, there are a lot of open-ended questions. I think many of us see some change that needs to be adopted into this plan. I don't think we all know exactly what those changes are yet, but I still believe that some good could come out of this plan. It's just a matter of everyone getting their voices heard and input included. And this is one time I advise reaching out to Steve individually to get into the weeds, because we're not all planning. We all have planning degrees. So I think doing that one-on-one with Steve and having to explain to you individually in layman terms would help benefit us all. Okay, so that
Chairman Kaides, I also would advise, as council members, to take a ride around. I think you get a very different perspective, as Tom did, and Barbara and Tom and I even did a walk around earlier in the area, and you just get a different perspective than hearing other people try to explain what's going on. So I just think that just needs to be done. It would help.
great idea and good point. I totally agree. I know some, when they heard industrial zoning study, they hoped that it would just eliminate all industrial uses. Obviously that can't happen, but I think there's a compromise that could benefit the city in here somewhere. So I look forward to working through it and having this come back to this committee.
I have to respond to that. And when I think that people say that, oh, we want to do, to get rid of industrial uses, we know that that doesn't make sense. But what people are complaining about and what the issue is that do they have to all be concentrated in one area? And so that has been the real crux of the issue from the beginning, is the types of things that are allowed and the area that they are predominantly in, and the impact that those types of businesses have on the community, particularly when they are not good neighbors. So I needed to say that.
Well said. Thank you. Okay, so now we will move on to the public hearing on the POCD citywide amendment to include the industrial zone studies. Sabrina, would you mind seeing who has their hands raised? And I'm going to remind the guests and the speakers to please keep your comments to under 3 minutes. And if you can please state your name at the beginning. Sabrina?
So our first hand raise was Diane Lauricella. Diane, I just promoted you. You should be able to speak now if you unmute yourself.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Diane Lauricella. First, I wanted to commend Steve Kleppen, his staff, Jessica, and this committee in even taking up this important, long-awaited effort. I don't think it's ready for prime time. So I feel that this committee, and it sounds like you are heading in this direction, is that you do not close out the public hearing tonight, because I think, and I agree with Ms. Young, that there are additional pieces of information that if the public was made aware in layman's terms, I think it could be very instructive and helpful. That said, many of you on the council do not know my history of a former regulator with the Department of Environmental Protection Waste Unit, where I spent a lot of time in Norwalk, Stamford, Bridgeport, looking at industrial sites. The word industrial is not a dirty word. And one thing that I stated and warned when we first undertook this great initiative was we must make sure, and UTL needed also to help us, make sure that people don't think of industrial use as bad use. We are no longer going to have smokestacks of the turn of the century. It's just not going to happen. Now, that said, I want to make sure that we also keep our minds open that I1 and I2 is also not a threat as long as they're good neighbors, as long as this city addresses the enforcement issue and education of those uses as well as the neighbors. That has not been the case on a regular basis, as I have spent a lot of my time and treasure and my reputation in South Norwalk with Amec Carting, with Gardol Chemical, and the public is tired of having to do the enforcement job of the city. That said, as well, the reason for the concentration in South Norwalk is the historic social justice issues, including environmental racism from the past. And of course, going forward, we want to try to reduce that. So I agree with much of what Ms. Young and Mr. Livingston's efforts are. I do think that we should make sure that those illegal contractor yards are shut down. And we don't want to help them come into compliance. We want to shut them down in South Norwalk. My open question is, has that happened? Or have they just been helped or cured, as was the history prior to Mr. Kleppen coming on board? The city's staff used to help people get illegal contractor yards become legal, or at least street legal. Lastly, I do want to thank Steve and UTL and others in listening to me to highlight Perry Avenue. I hope you'll also travel to the Perry Avenue area, where there are several streets named after gemstones. And it is a gemstone that's been highly underutilized. Back in the 80s, when the Muller Park area was upzoned because the city and the state did not want to enforce air quality laws, they said, well, let's just upzone the industrial park. That was such a waste of tax dollars and the use. So I'm glad to see that we're going to move to, I think, I2 from what currently is the case of the mistaken upzoning. Lastly, I wanted just to, again, thank you. There's more work to be done, more discussions to make sure of. Lastly, the pile heights that Steve speaks about often is with sand. Sand contains silica dust. Silica dust is a human carcinogen. There must be much better improvement of enforcement, of covering, of watering down, especially because these piles near Hokan Gas, et cetera, are near residential area. The MLK area is an area that was starting when I came to Norwalk over 30 years ago, and I just see the mission creep of residences starting to come in to what was supposed to be our industrial park area. Again, with enforcement, with the noise ordinance being enforced, which it is not right now, to my knowledge, in the modern, that the amended one. I do think we have to be cautious about that. Look at Danbury. They have several great industrial parks that don't hassle their neighbors. The MLK area was supposed to be not a bouncy house. It was supposed to be for industrial. So
Diane, your time's up. So if you just want to finish.
I'll wrap up. If our Chamber of Commerce helps the city, and Sabrina and others in all their good intent looks for clean industrial uses, we will find them. But when you don't look for them, you're never going to have them. Thank you for all the hard work you all are doing. And please feel free to call me, since I do have some professional planning in that field of manufacturing. Thank you.
We have Meek. You should now be able to unmute yourself and speak. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, hi, sorry, I have a camera issue, a new laptop I'm working on. Brian Meek, 11 Cranberry Woods Road, Norwalk, Connecticut. Go quick. I'm here to save you 30 grand tonight for the city. Stop that traffic study. There's no reason to do it right now. We don't have a good viewpoint of what Strawberry Hill traffic really looks like until that bridge is completed. But more importantly than that, if you didn't notice, a few months ago, the United States Senate, in a bipartisan vote, approved the Sunshine Protection Act, which is going to eliminate daylight savings, or actually move us on to daylight savings, and we never go back. That right there should change that whole study and analysis. And doing a hand count while Strawberry Hill's under construction, you're doing that study on the bottom of Highland, just scrap it, table it, save the money, do it later. That's all I have to say. That's my informed opinion of what I know. And my uninformed opinion is TOD2, I approve that. And I'm the last guy to say, you know, let's pack every last square inch of apartments, of the city with apartments, even though that seems what we're doing. But that little project right there looks really good. Thanks for your hard work. Oh, I yield the rest of my time to Diane Lauricella. No, I'm just kidding.
We have Keith Brown. Keith, you should be allowed to speak now if you unmute yourself.
Okay, good evening. I'm Keith Brown. I reside at 373 Rowayton Avenue, and my business is RBA Properties, and we are at 252 East Avenue in East Norwalk. And I had a fairly long prepared statement to read and probably would have gone over 3 minutes. However, I don't know if it's necessary right now, as long as this meeting is going to not close out a public hearing tonight and go on to another possibility to address. I think a number of the issues that were brought up by the commissioners are also things that I was going to bring up, and perhaps it would be easier and best to take the opportunity to discuss those directly with Steve and see if there aren't mutual areas that could benefit everybody and make this a more desirable plan. I mean, the area that we're in has gone through 6 different studies over the last 10 years. I was on, I think, 2 and maybe 3 of those committees. And so I'm pretty closely, I know what's going on down in this neighborhood. And I think that there are things that could happen here that would allow the industrial uses to be in there. The reality is that the area that is zoned L1 right now and puts a purple haze over the whole area is actually more residential than it is industrial. And if you start encouraging more industrial in that L2 zone, you're going, or I2 zone, you're probably going to see more residential disappear. And I don't think that's the answer to the neighborhood. It's a pretty good, vibrant neighborhood. And I think that if we were to look at tweaking the industrial I2 to really look for an opportunity in an area like this, which I think is a lot different than many of the other areas that have been designated to have I-2, that it could be tweaked to bring along some of the lightest and tenderest industrial uses to go into that area. And there is a need for them. We are currently filling, we've got 20,000 feet of a 40,000 foot building already occupied by those types of uses. And so I would encourage us to look at a way to tweak this to enable it to have, maybe by special permit, other things that would allow much more tender, much more light industrial uses, and not, say, for instance, a 20,000 foot parking garage that you can park construction vehicles in, that although we all know trucks are coming into that area, that is going to put a lot more strain where all those trucks leave a 20,000 foot garage and drive through the streets of South Norwalk and go somewhere else than it would be to put I'll use a more tender industrial use in there that is more tied in with the actual neighborhood that's there. So I hope that the hearing will be continued. And if I need to come back and read a whole statement into it, I can do that. But hopefully I can sit down with Steve, which I'll make an appointment to go talk to him, and we can see how that might be mutually massaged to get some of Tom's concerns answered and Darlene's concerns answered, and make this whole thing come together. Thank you for listening to me.
Thanks, Keith. If anybody else is here to speak, please raise your hand. All right, we have the East Norwalk Neighborhood Association. You should be able to unmute yourself and speak.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Hi, it's Diane Cece with East Norwalk Neighborhood Association. I don't need to come on camera, but I hope it's not uncomfortable for you just to continue to listen to voices behind a screen here. And Mr. Chairman, I hope you'll indulge me, because I'm probably one of the few residents and actual stakeholder groups that have been working and looking at this for quite some time. And I know this is likely not to be the last bite at the apple, but I would like to make a number of significant points, because I would like for you as committee members to leave here tonight to hear some points that you'll consider going forward prior to your June meeting. And a housekeeping thing, just before I start, I would like to ask Mr. Kleppen, this will be no surprise, if you could post the actual presentation that you gave tonight on the website, because it is a different version, and I checked as recently as today, it was still the old one. The one that you've now put together starts to really make some of these things clearer, and that is a huge help. I also want to say that I second what Ms. Young and Mr. Livingston said, also Miss Loricella and Mr. Brown as well. So as a matter for the record, ditto on all of those. And then I also want to open up with thinking, the more that I heard you guys talking, the more I see that this is really kind of a catch-22 situation right now with looking at revamping these zones. Because while many of us want, you to hit the, our age-old cry of hit the pause button, the fact remains that for however much time it takes us to continue to hone this down and get it right, all of these uses, except for one that's a moratorium, are acceptable uses today. And so the longer this process takes, the more we're at risk of having applications come before Mr. Kleppen that he has no legal ability to deny. And so even though Mr. Kleppen will tell you that some of them are highly unlikely, things we talk about like petroleum storage plants and propane gas storage and things like that, yes, they're unlikely, but the fact remains they could come in tomorrow, and he has no choice but to submit a legally conforming application to the commissions. The scary part about that is that many of these applications come in as special permits. And as you know, those are difficult to deny because it's so stringent in terms of what the commissioners can look at. So I definitely realize this is a catch-22, but I think that now that Mr. Kleppen has taken the time to look at this, I think we really need to get this right, and as right as we can get the first time around. do applaud Mr. Kleppen and staff and committee and consultants in that they were looking at reducing the size of the parcels that fell under the most objectionable I-1 uses. However, I don't think that there's been enough done to actually reduce the objectionable uses, even though they took some of them out. So the amount of land has been reduced, but we're still faced with a lot of those things on the list, and I'll hope you'll review them individually to see what could still come into those parcels, and they would be allowed. I can actually name a few of them in a few minutes. Some basic observations that I have here is that I personally think that when you're looking at land use and zoning, that the justification for inclusion of any particular use rests solely with city staff and the committee that was looking at this. The onus should never be on the public to justify why a use should be excluded. It should always be the opposite. So if you're looking at a use, there should be a good justification under a number of criteria to say, we think this belongs in this particular area.
Diane, your time is up if you just want to wrap it up. Sorry.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I hope, Mr. Chair, would you indulge me for extra time if there's not a long list of speakers to?
Yes, Diane.
Thank you. We also think that the justification really shouldn't be based on the presence of existing businesses. And we were glad to hear that Steve did clarify the fact that some of these uses that would go away then would simply be legal non-conforming for the future, because we don't want him to include anything in here simply because maybe a long-standing business or a beloved business is already there. If the justifications end up being on economic development, job creation, or grand list and property tax revenue, we would ask that the committee then focus or ask staff to be able to provide the rationale with facts and data. What do these industries provide in jobs? What are the salaries, et cetera? And what would the tax revenues be? For example, some of the industrial sectors that are mentioned in here that would be possibly desirable, many of those types of industries have long since automated. So the types of jobs that you would see coming in with some of these uses that were in the past, it's a mere shadow, of themselves in terms of headcount and good salary. I wanted to point out that also, as you guys are all well aware, there's been a lot of debate and contentious and emotional feelings over all of the building heights within Norwalk and how gradually the heights have been going higher and higher. When you look at the materials from Steve, you're going to see that the current 50 feet and 72 feet that exist is now proposed to be 65 and 85 feet in the industrial 1 zone. And when you see how much of the industrial 1 zone is still left in South Norwalk, I hope you'll take a good look at that. And I hope that you'll ask staff to illustrate in iconic buildings exactly what 85 feet is. I don't think a lot of people know how high that is. In addition to the building heights, when you go through the bulk and height schedule that staff has provided you, I ask you to take particular attention to the reduction in the rear, side, and front yardage that is now in there. It was before it was at 10 feet per building story or 20 feet, whichever was larger. Bear in mind, these buildings can be 4 stories or more. Now it's only a maximum requirement of 10 feet. That's a big difference. In the multifamily zones, I would ask you, in the zones that would allow multifamily dwelling, I would ask you to consider the fact that there hasn't been any improvement to a requirement on outdoor space, especially for children, but also for pets and dogs and things like that. I'm sorry, I just lost my space here. The other thing is too, is Mr. Kleppen mentioned to you tonight that of course some of these businesses really are required in communities in order to service the communities. But I wonder if there's a way for you all to consider that many of these businesses, just by their very nature, really are serving the regional area. And that's why I was glad to see that some of the referrals are both to Westcog and to our neighboring towns, because I don't think Norwalk should be the path of least resistance for objectionable uses that service the region. Yes, everybody needs, contractor stuff and rock crushing stuff and everything, but why is it dumped in Norwalk to provide those services when those other communities, let's face it, they can give you all the arguments they want that they don't have the room for it or yada, yada. The fact is they don't allow those in their communities. And so they're taking advantage of South Norwalk in particular, and to some extent East Norwalk to do that. You already saw the long list of objectionable uses that Steve provided that are still there. So I won't go into that, but I can give you those off later, the ones that we're particularly concerned with. And then finally, when, sorry, I already mentioned that those applications could come in any day. When Mr. Kleppen talked to you about traffic studies, I think it was Ms. Young who raised an excellent point about traffic with trucks coming in. What they don't do, and Steve will explain this, is that they're not going to look at truck traffic based on the industry. What they almost always do is they wait for the special permit to come in and make that a requirement of either the site plan or the special permit. And guess what, guys? It's always going to come back as what? No significant impact. By the time it gets to a site plan or special permit, it's the fait accompli. So I agree with the request that I think it was Ms. Young put in, that analysis be done up front based on the industry and the size of the particular parcel. And those standards exist with the traffic engineers and their national standards. So he could certainly provide them. And then in closing, I do want to say that in addition, Mr. Kleppen, to making your presentation available tonight, that would be so helpful. We'll get it out to the community. That in the future, we would like to make sure that the committees and commissions have enough information to make informed decisions. But also we need materials for them and for the public that are readable and very easy to understand in formats. And one of the things that we recommend, and we've recommended it in the past, is what we call what, why. And what that says is, what is there now or could be? What is it that you're proposing would be there now or could be? And why would that be an improvement? And it's a really basic kind of concept that people can visualize and understand. And when you articulate it that way, then they go, oh yeah, this is what's on that block now. This is what could be there. And this is why they're saying it would be better. Then you leave it to this committee members and the public to be the final judges on, I guess, whether they think it would be an improvement. I know I went way over my time. I thank you so much. I thank Chairman Kites for keeping this open for public comment. We're going to encourage residents to go ahead and send emails into you as the chairman so that you'll have continued feedback. And I'll try to clean up all the chicken scratch that I just wrote and get that in as formal comment to you. And thank you all so much.
Thank you. Sabrina, anybody else?
If anybody else is here to speak, if you could please raise your hand. John, there's no more hands at this moment.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Steve. Thank you all those who came out to speak. Thank you, committee members. Now we close the public-
Chairman,
Yeah.
Can I just say, I wanted to say thank you to Steve. I know it is not easy. I know I have been very passionate about this issue with South Norwalk. And I just want to thank you in front of everybody. I know I asked you a lot of questions, but it was interesting. And if you remember this conversation that you and I had, we ran into each other at City Hall, and it was interesting. You came over to me and I said, we're okay, right? I had to do what I needed to do. I'm sorry, John. But John said something very interesting. I mean, Steve said something very interesting. He said, I see why it's taken so long to revise the zoning regulations, why that's a hard decision. But it's a decision that has to happen. It's something that definitely needs to happen because it's difficult. right? You've got people on both sides, on all sides of this issue that you're trying to not appease, but we're trying to work together on this. But I just wanted to say that I appreciate your time, because we've talked about this quite a bit. So I really do appreciate you. It's taken a lot of time and patience on your end, I'm sure, dealing with angry people and, you know, folks who have an axe to grind or an issue. But I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you and well said. Anybody else want to chime in before we move on? Okay. Okay, thank you all. Now moving on to item 2B, transportation marketing and mobility. And that is to authorize Harry W. Reeling to execute the First Amendment to the agreement with Fitzgerald and Halliday, Inc., DBA FHI Studio, for the City of Norwalk Transportation Master Plan to examine the impacts on traffic and roads due to proposed changes in school bell time schedules for a cost not to exceed $31,375. The funding for this work will be provided by the Board of Education. Would someone like to move that? Thank you, Mr. Livingston. Who's going to speak to this? We have Mr. Travers. Are you with us tonight to speak to this?
So Mr. Travers is not here tonight, but Michael Yosak is going to speak to this item.
Okay, Mr. Yosak, welcome. Or not? Is he here with us?
Mike?
Mike, you there, Mike?
So I'm happy to speak to it, or if you'd like, we can wait for Mike to, and I can speak to the next item. And we also have James Emery here as well.
Okay, so yeah, no problem. Let's we'll go back to Mike. Let's move on. Obviously, there's no item number 2. So actually, we'll make the next item number 2. Seeing that we got a little mistake here in the agenda, and that's to authorize the mayor, Harry Reeling, to execute an on-call contract with Fuss & O'Neill, Inc. for the amount not to exceed $300,000. Many account numbers noted. Who would like to speak to that?
I'm happy to speak to it.
Please.
So good evening, council members. So I'm going to speak largely to items 2, 3, and 4 generally. But in March of this year, we put out a request for on-call consulting services to assist transportation, mobility, and parking. And that closed at the end of April. It was largely, we had 10 different criteria that we were looking for assistance for. It included everything from grant funding assistance to transportation planning, design service assistance, assistance with reviewing and planning for traffic signal plans, and construction, inspection, and administration services. So it was a really large net that we cast. We had 5 different firms respond to an RFP. And we were able to, the selection committee was able to shortlist that to 3 firms, which you see before you tonight in items 2, 3, and 4 respectively. But I just want to provide a little bit more context of how this came about. So we put out this on-call, to be responsive to all the different funding opportunities that are coming out. We know we have a significant amount of funding that has been dedicated to economic and community development for transportation projects through ARPA, including the Wall Street construction phases 2 and 3, mobility and sidewalks, streetscape and tree planting improvements, and sidewalks in Sono. We also have MLK funding that has come down the pike, and these consultants will help us design plans to implement a staircase on MLK, and also sidewalks, as well as some different crossings. And additionally, we put this on call out. We have numerous capital projects planned, but for example, the consultants will help us with the design of the roundabout at Gregory Boulevard and Marvin Street. In addition, we had a capital request this year for roadway design and reconstruction, which will really allow us to be responsive in the event that there's accidents on the roadways, quick hit designs, and to meet some of the citizen service inquiries that come in. And we also know that there's many grants grants that we recently received, including West Rocks Road sidewalks. This will help get that design done and also make us prepared for future funding opportunities and start to get some plans on the shelf. We know at the end of this month, there'll be a Safe Streets for All solicitation, and we're currently looking at some different projects that would be eligible for that. So that's kind of a really high level summary of why we needed it. I'm happy to answer any questions, but you'll see tonight before you our recommendations to award who we felt were the most 3 qualified firms that met criteria of being responsive to our needs, had competitive fees, and had proven records of success. So I'm happy to answer any questions. You'll see we divide the contract into 3 different sums.
Mr. Keegan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I ask a question about the school bell start times project? Garrett, you can answer that. Okay, what do you expect this study to tell you?
So I believe this was, FHI is currently conducting our transportation master plan, which is looking holistically at the city's plan for the next 10 years. But my understanding is the Board of Ed requested, and it would be funded through this amendment to that contract would be funded through the Board of Ed, but was looking for a review of the proposed bell time changes, and that FHI, since they are already looking at the entire transportation network in the city, would perform a review of the traffic impacts associated with the proposed changing of the bell times.
Just from my chair, my question would be with the construction, as Mr. Meek said earlier, the construction of the Strawberry Hill Bridge, and now we're likely going to go into a gigantic construction phase of a new Norwalk High School. Do we think it's prudent to do this?
So this would be, so my understanding is this would be a citywide study. We recognize we have that bridge and it will be under construction until late next year is the current status. And then also we have the ongoing walk bridge project, which will be in construction for the next several years. It could be 5, it could be longer. But the consultant would rely on, so there's been numerous traffic studies that have been done for both of those projects and in that area. So they would rely on historical data, future projections, and it would be done for not just this area of the city, but also the entire city-wide network.
Chairman, I'm sorry, my mic went off before. This is Mike Yosak. Can you hear me now? Or
Yes, hear you loud and clear, Mike.
Okay, thanks. Yes, Garrett's right. Basically, what happened is a couple of years ago, the bell time study was done. They were going to do a traffic study at that time. COVID came, so they couldn't do a very good traffic study. They moved the bell times last year, and it was a total disaster, and they had to call it off. So they would still like to have the study done just to complete their packet. It doesn't mean that they're going to move or not move, but they would like to have the study done so they could answer people. And it'll be done in the spring and in the fall. So if you have any other questions, I know you went to the other item first, but.
Mike, just to clarify, who's paying for that? The Board of Education or the city?
The Board of Education had put this money away for this traffic study at the time, so that money is still there, and that's what's being used for the study.
I guess I'm confused with the amount of money we're approving for this contract then. So am I missing something here?
What's happening is this, because they're doing it on our master plan study, we still need to authorize the money on the city's behalf, even though the money is being funded by the city.
I'm sorry. Does that effectively mean that we only have which contract is it? This is the
citywide master traffic plan. So this
but which contract we're approving now? So okay. Gotcha. Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Someone like to move item, we're calling it 2.
Excuse me,
B2?
Mr. Chair,
Oh,
can I,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
Yes.
since we're, back to the traffic study, and another point that Mr. Meek brought up that was something I had wondered about is the time change. I don't know exactly. My understanding is that's not going to go into effect for another year or something. But, is that being considered? Would that be considered in the traffic study? And how could it be?
Hey, Barbara, just as an aside, that there's a lot been written about that vote in the Congress that nobody knew about it. So I wouldn't count on that going through.
Yeah, well, and it was done in the 70s and reversed like within months because it was such a disaster. So there's that.
But it's a good question.
It seems like a factor. Not that it's going to affect the actual traffic, but okay.
Mike, is that something that can be added to the scope of the study or addressed as part of the scope?
I can certainly discuss that with the consultants.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, would someone like to move item 2? I'm sorry, I'm not seeing all your hands. I apologize. Thank you, Lisa. Ms. Shanahan. Okay. All in favor, please raise your hand to signify yes. I'm trying to see you all. Hold on. There you go. Oh, unanimous. Great. Okay. Might as well finish this up and then go back to item 1. Authorize Mayor Harry W. to execute an on-call contract with Vanessa Hagan Bruslin Inc. for the amount not to exceed $400,000. Account numbers noted. Would someone like to move this? Thank you, Mr. Livingston. Garrett, I guess you pretty much kind of gave us the gist. Anything else you want to add to this?
No, I think, nope, nothing else.
You covered it all. Okay.
Yeah.
All in favor, please raise your hand. Say yes. Unanimous. Okay, item 4, authorize Mayor to execute an on-call contract with WSP USA Inc. for the amount not to exceed $300,000. And if there are no questions, I would like to ask someone to move this item. Thank you, Ms. Smith. All in favor, please raise your hand and signify yes. Unanimous, great. Okay, let's jump back to item 1. Mr. Livingston had moved that item. Mr. Yosak, would you like to speak to it, please?
Sure, Chairman. Thank you. About 3 years ago, the Board of Education, looked to move the start time of the high school later. They proposed everything, and one of the things that was proposed was a traffic study, which never happened because COVID came, so the traffic study wasn't done. They moved the bell times. Things didn't turn out very well, so they went back to the old start time. But they still would like to just take a look at it again, and by having the traffic study, and that's basically what they're looking to do. It will be paid for out of their funds. And if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Mike, was a traffic study done previously?
No, there was never any traffic study done for this. We had planned on doing a traffic study. They had gotten funds for it, but we weren't able to execute because of the COVID came, so we weren't able to undergo the traffic study.
Yeah, I mean, someone experienced these changes firsthand, and I mean, I've heard the rumors and the talk of traffic and drop offs and just this, I guess the chaos of it all. I just wonder what spending $32,000 will solve. But okay, if there are there any other questions to this?
So Chairman, I just had a question. So if we didn't, we got funding for that. Was that through our money, through city money? Was it grant funded?
I don't believe so. Tom, Mike?
This money here it's Board of Ed money that they had put away for this traffic study as part of their
Same thing. Okay.
Do you have an idea, Mike, of when they're going to get the results back for this traffic study? Are they looking to implement this time change in the in the spring? Excuse me, with the fall startup of next year?
No, it most likely won't be the fall of next year. What they would like to do is get counts right now in the spring, and then look at it again also in the fall. So it'd probably be a year or so away if they went to do this.
Okay.
They're not. They would just like to have the study to say whether or not they should continue to even look at changing bell times.
Yeah, if I could just add, I imagine that part of the reason it was such a disaster is because they didn't do the traffic study in advance. So I think it needs to be done if this is something that they want to move forward with. The time change, the school start time change.
That's correct. Yes.
All in favor? Opposed? Oh, let the record show Mr. Keegan opposed. The motion passes. Okay, moving on. Something I wanted to talk to Mr. Travers about, but I guess he's busy tonight. But I wanted to talk about parking violations and the courtesy car program. Came to the attention of the finance committee at our last meeting that there was a major increase in violation revenue. And I don't know, for you that have been around a while, now this has always been a pet peeve of mine, violations in parking and discouraging folks to come out and to local businesses, especially in our urban core. So I believe, Garrett, you've been tasked with speaking to this and kind of give us an overview of what's been happening and how we got to this point.
Yes, and I'm joined by James Emery. He's our Assistant Director of Parking, and he's going to provide tonight an overview of the courtesy program, and then you can speak to some of your concerns as well. So I will let James take it away.
Perfect. Thanks, Garrett. Good evening, council members. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. As I spoke about at the finance meeting last month, one thing that I've started to really look into at this point is our, among many other things, our enforcement program as a whole, right? And that consists of sitting down and having interviews with all of our enforcement officers, understanding schedules, understanding staffing, routes. I've also been walking the streets and going in and speaking to the business owners and the customers that are in those businesses to really get a feel for what's going on. And because perception really is reality, right? So I wanted to hear directly from them, and I thought that was really important. Along with that, I've started to dig into the citation data and our courtesy data. So I'm really in the middle of a large project and getting a good understanding of our enforcement program as a whole. But to speak to Mr. Keide's point, I'd like to share my screen, if that's okay with you guys, and show you some of the courtesy citation data over the last 5 years that I've been able to compile. All right, is everybody able to see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Yep. All right, great. Thank you so much. So there's a couple of things that I want to point out here is our paid space totals down bottom breaks it down by specific area in Norwalk, and that the Wall Street meters were installed in December of 2019, which is where you see the spike in paid spaces. I just wanted to point that out to help kind of have a little bit of an understanding on the data. So what you'll see here is we've got our total citations, which is the total amount of citations written in that fiscal year, or in this fiscal year up to the data's live as of 4/6 is when I started pulling this information. Our courtesy citation program that we offer is specifically for expired meter citations only. We don't offer courtesy citations for things like safety violations, parking in a crosswalk, things like that, because pedestrian safety is obviously paramount, and we want to make sure that we are paying attention to that. So you'll see that out of our total citations, I've pulled out the amount of expired meters for that citations for that fiscal year, and the percentage of the, my apologies, the percentage of the expired meter citations compared to the totals, along with the totals of courtesy citations, and then the percentage of those courtesy citations directly related to the expired meter citations. So what we're seeing as a whole across the city is a little bit of a compliance issue, and that's looking like it's standard across the board. We're still waiting to hear back from some other contacts and some other municipalities and universities to see if they have seen the same thing, and if they have they been able to climb out of it, and how well have they been able to climb out of it. So, we're working with a couple of those from across the country, as far out as California, to just try and get a good understanding of what other municipalities are seeing across the country. Just to see, are we an anomaly, or is this kind of standard across the board? And from what I'm hearing, I haven't heard back from enough to really put my stamp of approval on it, but it does seem like that this is certainly an issue that's affecting everybody everywhere. We went to most places went to no citations really being written for expired meters, or very few. They went to a very lenient system, and climbing out of that seems to be a bit difficult across the board. I'm certainly not saying that is the only reason. I think there are many other things that we need to look at, and I am certainly in the middle of evaluating all of those things. But that's certainly a portion of it. So you can see that obviously during the heavy COVID times, we issued way more courtesy citations than we did expired meter citations, which is good. We needed to encourage people to come downtown to patronize those businesses as much as possible, because they're getting hurt, right? And the whole point of on-street parking is to help facilitate the success of the businesses in the area. That's its goal. So we are actively looking and evaluating our system as a whole right now to figure out what we can do, whether it's incentive programs to help people and pay the meter, and what we can do, what kind of things people are doing in other parts of the country outside the box that can really help facilitate getting people to pay the meter. Because citation it's a necessary evil, and we would much rather our revenue be generated from people paying the meter than writing the citations. So that's kind of our goal and what we're looking for.
James, I'm going to cut you off right there. So if I'm reading this correctly, you gave in 21-22, obviously we've got some time left to 22, you issued 27,485 citations, and 20,483 were for expired meters.
Correct.
And the expired percentage was 75, and you gave out 3,292 courtesy citations, correct? So 16%? I mean,
Yes, that's correct.
So I'm reading this. So your courtesy program has gone down from what I'm seeing significantly from years past. I mean, is that, or am I reading that incorrectly?
No, yeah, you're absolutely spot on. That is correct.
Okay. So, I mean, I know I've said this before. I said at the finance meeting, you had a change of the guard. I mean, I don't think there's this one person that's been around, you know, very long at all. But you guys bring definitely a lot of new vision, which is I feel has been very positive in many ways. But I as someone that's out there, I see the enforcement officers, whatever title they hold, in a militant fashion, passing out. I mean, giving out tickets. I mean, to the extent where meters are expired by 30 seconds. This has been a thing of mine, and I really would. I guess I brought you here to really say that I would like to see courtesy citations expand some more further than they are now. I've been down this black hole of parking for many years, and Tom Livingston, I know you've been there with me. You've seen me just kind of make this my thing, because it affects everything. It affects business. It affects livelihoods. It affects so much. So, I mean, is there a plan to increase the courtesy program?
Yes, there is. There absolutely is. I'm looking at ways to use the current technology that we have to help make it more fair and more universal. Specifically, is there a way for our LPR system where we can program every day, X amount of citations throughout the city, randomly pop up, and when you go to issue the citation, and it pops up and just says, please issue a courtesy citation for this citation.
So you want to take it out of the enforcement officer's hands and have it be an automated system?
That's exactly what I want to do. I want to be able to tell the system, we want to do X amount of courtesy citations, every day, every week, every month, whatever it is, whatever we end up coming up with, to be able to just make it, take the human element out of it, right? Because I think that's just a more fair way to do it. I don't know if the technology can handle it that we have right now, but that's one option we're looking into among others. Because I think the courtesy citation program is a wonderful thing. I really do. And I've visited hundreds of municipalities, and there are very, very few that do the courtesy citation program. I think it's a wonderful program, and if implemented properly, I think it will do wonders to help kind of mitigate that feeling of being watched constantly by the enforcement officers.
James, do you think in the interim, until we find this technology or get that up and running, that we can put this back into the hands of the parking enforcement officers to continue with the with the citations, the courtesy cards that they were giving out before? Because we're going into the peak of summer. It would be a shame to, have this, drag on for however long it takes to get the ball rolling on the other side.
I do. I do. I'm probably a week or two away from finishing my full evaluation of our enforcement program. And at the end of that, I plan on implementing some changes that will help ease the burden on the people visiting Norwalk and patronizing those businesses.
Okay. All right.
I'm very, very confident in that.
And we would have to propose these to the Norwalk Parking Authority, and they would have to be approved by their chair.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, they've had significant change on that side too. I know you guys may not know the history, but this is something we've been working on for years. It was, so it's, I'm just trying to get that ball rolling again and not have to start from scratch. So great. I'm glad to see you're looking into it, and I hope to, I look forward to the updates and hearing what you guys come up with, and happy to hear it's on your radar. Okay. Any other questions for the gentleman? No? Okay, great. Thank you, guys. Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having us. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for indulging me on that. It's my pet peeve.
Hey, mine too. That's parking.
Okay, next up, redevelopment agency, item C1, that's to authorize the mayor to execute a license agreement with Sono TOD2 LLC over 46,107 square foot portion of 30 Monroe Street for purposes of due diligence investigation concerning said realty and all other agreements and documents necessary and incidental to the purpose for which said license agreement is granted. Very well, very well written motion. Would someone like to move that, please? No, Mr. Livingston. Okay, Mr. Bedoli, I believe we have you with us this evening to speak to this item.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to speak to this project tonight. For my presentation, I'm going to use the memo that I issued as a sort of guide. I think it's on page 20 of your packet. So I'll give you a second if you want to kind of navigate to there. I'll go through some of the considerations of the project. Also, more on the city side of things. And then we're also going to be joined by Spinnaker, as well as their project architect, to talk a little bit more about the details of the specific project that's being proposed. So what I really wanted to do with the memo is to just kind of summarize and describe the proposed redevelopment of 1517 Chestnut. And that's right in South Norwalk. It's the part of the transit-oriented development district. And what would it involve is a private developer assembling privately owned parcels at the corner of Chestnut and Henry, and then the potential disposition of 60 parking spaces at 30 Monroe Street. So that's the surface lot at the South Norwalk train station. Since this public-private partnership would involve the sale of city-owned land, I put forth a draft term sheet that's been negotiated with the developer and a license agreement to enable them to do due diligence if this is a project that there's interest in advancing. A lot of this, which we'll be reading tonight, is really the initial steps. We're looking to get this approved at a conceptual level by the council. And what we'll have to do from there is actually develop a full land disposition agreement that'll sort out a few more particulars and really provide the details around the framework of the deal. So in terms of the actual project, what's being proposed is a 200-unit mixed-use project at 1517 Chestnut. Many of you will remember this has been a large part of the South Norwalk TOD discussion, making sure that we're taking a look at what that would mean for traffic in the area, what the design could be like, and some of the goals that we hope to achieve through that plan through this development. I will say it's not very often that we're in a situation where we're able to approve a plan, which just occurred, as at the last was considered at the last March meeting, and then get right into implementation. So it's a very positive sort of outcome of the whole process that we engage with the community and also the development community. So to enable the development of this project, we propose the sale of a portion of the city-owned parking lot to the developer for its current fair market appraised value, which is $4.6 million. We had it appraised, and that's included as attachment C to this report. Given the high cost of structured parking, and one of the big components of this is that we do not want to be without those 60 commuter parking spaces at any point throughout the project. We're looking to structure those in the development and then service that through a temporary parking plan during construction, and just making sure that we have continuity in the provision of parking. To that end, though, structured parking isn't cheap, as I know many of you know, but it's estimated to be about $35,000 a space. And the revenue that we expected to generate, or the actual value of the revenue from the surface parking lot, didn't cover that entire amount. So the city, as a result, will credit a little over $1 million of the sale proceeds towards the replacement of the 60 spaces within the structured parking garage. So this was negotiated based on the estimation of looking at the revenue, applying a cap rate, and then working it through with the developer. And some of you may be aware that this public-private partnership is further supported by a $6 million community challenge grant, and it's really dependent upon that. And what that seeks to do is to provide the public infrastructure necessary to support this project through improvements along Chestnut, Monroe, Henry, and Martin Luther King. An additional $1 million of that secured grant funding will be allocated towards the rehabilitation of existing affordable housing in the project area. So in terms of public benefits that will be generated by this, from an urban design perspective, the developer is proposing a public plaza across from the train station. We're going to be doing a lot of green infrastructure improvements around the area, really trying to create South Norwalk as a showcase project, not only for Norwalk, but the whole state of Connecticut. I mean, this is a huge opportunity for transit-oriented development. And with this grant, we're really able to integrate some of the higher end complete streets features that we all are really have been advocating for collectively. And I actually included some conceptual designs as attachment D, but the developer will actually go through those in more detail. So taking a look at the development program, I'm on page 21 of the report. We're talking about 202 units. in line with typical market averages of about 850 square feet, $2,100 a month. These are all, pretty standard across the board. Structuring the parking, including the 60 commuter spaces, in addition to parking the overall development program. We did an initial financial analysis, and this is really for estimation and discussion purposes. As we move forward with LDA, things are going to develop, and we're going to have to, recalibrate some of these numbers. But what we're looking at in terms of economic benefit to the city as a result of a $53+ million project is really just, taking a hard look at increasing the tax value. So the current annual tax on these properties that we're referring to is about $22,000 a year. The incremental value, the money in addition to that we could expect from this development is at the full tax value. Just the big caveat is this is going to be under the enterprise zone, which has a phase structure. At year 8, which is the full value under that program, is $878,000 a year. So there's a significant increase in terms of its utility from an economic perspective. I wanted to sort of project that out so you could have a sort of understanding of what that looks like over the 10-year period, given the enterprise zone benefit. And that's about $5.7 million. I added that then into the land acquisition cost of 4.6 to result in a $10 million benefit. And then the fact that we're leveraging $6 million additional dollars through the state program, looking at an estimated economic benefit of about $16 million to the city over the 10-year period as a result of this project. And again, just full caveats, this assumes the enterprise zone, which is permitted in this area. And the estimates for planning, these are for discussion purposes only. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of the mill rate, project design, the final negotiation, LDA. One of the things that obviously is of critical importance to a public-private partnership is how do you manage risk, right? You're selling a piece of property, but it's different than just a typical real estate transaction in that you have a vested interest in what is ultimately built there as the seller. So I put together a general list of some of the considerations that I think we were really focused on and how we attempted to mitigate those risks. And that's fully detailed in the LDA term sheet, which is included in this report. But I wanted to kind of go over the highlights for you all. The first one is obviously the replacement parking. As I mentioned, we want to make sure that we are not without those 60 parking spaces at any point throughout the project. The way we've approached that is through project phasing. And it's become a little bit more complicated because we just received this grant last month, and there is actual assurance guarantee in that grant that these units be constructed or that the funds have to actually be paid back. So the way the LDA is currently written is to have either a phased approach where you will have the parking be constructed in phase 1, and then the parking spaces will actually be taken. So that they could actually use the temporary parking in the building while they start constructing on the site or the city site. But what it's looking more like is we're going to have to adopt a more hybrid model to achieve the requisite profile of the grant and do it as sort of a hybrid one-phase project and still looking to accommodate the temporary parking in a similar way. But again, we're going to flesh all that out through the full LDA, and that will be finalized before your consideration in terms of what that actually looks like. Project completion is obviously a risk, right? We want to make sure that the project gets built as we, approve or we feel that is of value to the community. So what we've been doing is working with the developer to actually secure the purchase price of the transaction, and they've been willing to provide a personal guarantee on the development. And I could let Spinnaker speak a little bit more to that if you have specific questions. The grant considerations, obviously, as I mentioned, are a risk. We have to make sure that these units get built or else the grant has to be paid back. The one thing that I can say, though, in functional reality, the grant is a reimbursable program. So as we move through the project, we get more assurances in terms of approvals, phasing, and the like. That's when we'll start spending money. So it'll phase out over time. So it's not all up front at once, and then you're on the hook if something happens down the road. We could play with the schedule. We could work on that to try to mitigate our risk. And that's what we're doing to limit ultimately our exposure. And I think the other one is just approval delays, and that goes on both sides, on the developer and the city side, and macroeconomic conditions, right? I think that, with interest rates and things changing in the economy right now, it's important to note. I don't have a crystal ball. If I did, I'd be looking for different real estate deals myself. But what we're really doing is to work with the developer to ensure that adequate contingency is made in their financial pro forma to make sure that we can hopefully weather the storm through all of this. So from there I will let I believe Matt Edverson and Bruce Beinfeld may be on the call as well. Are you there, Matt? You might need to be invited as a panelist, Sabrina.
Hold on, I'm gonna promote him, but I think he'll get out and move back in. Hold on.
Oh, I want to touch this.
Promote. I think it's gonna shut him out and then he'll join back in as a panelist and he should be fine.
Hey, Brian, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi guys. Thanks, Brian. So yeah, Brian covered, high level and a lot of details. My name's Matt Everton with Spinnaker Real Estate Partners. Some of you may know some of our work. The company goes back 60 or so years. But for the last 35 or so years, we've spent a lot of our time in the South Norwalk and the greater Norwalk community, building a number of projects you probably are familiar with. And for the last 25 years, we've actually been headquartered in South Norwalk. Our activities in South Norwalk started with the renovation of the Rudner building on North Main Street, which some of you probably know as where the original Barcelona restaurant started. And it kind of evolved to do some historic rehab back at the Corsa factory on Ann Street and Block building on Marshall Street. And then some new construction in the area, including Sona Lofts, Maritime Yards, Ironworks, 19 Day, and most recently the platform right next door to this site that we're talking about now. Just mention those just to kind of give a brief, little bit of evidence of our qualifications and our ability to execute this proposed transaction, as well as our commitment to the community. The project itself, I've been involved in for the last decade or so, and it's never been closer to reality than it is today. With that, I turn it over to Bruce, and so I don't repeat what he has to say about the plan in particular. Bruce, if he can get invited, there he is, will bring us through the plans. And just all those projects I've listed in the past, Bruce has been the architect working alongside folks at Spinnaker, and many of which have won awards. And Bruce can maybe talk about that a little bit in addition to the plans that he's going to go through. I'll share my screen, Bruce, and I'll turn it over to you and open to any questions from any of the commission members here, or common council members, sorry.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, Bruce.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Bruce, we hear you.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, yeah, so like Matt, I've been involved in this project for about 10 years, and seeing how the area right around the train station really was an embarrassment to the city in terms of just the dilapidated buildings and the amount of crime that had been generated like on this part of Chestnut Street about 10 years ago. It was particularly bad, and so we saw this area around the train station. The thing that really got me most excited about the potential of this spot was I heard a 2009 report that said that the state of Connecticut had the largest outward migration of 25 to 35-year-olds of any state in the country. And I thought that was just it was really bad news for the state that I had lived in basically all my life, to hear that young people were we have some of the best schools in Fairfield County in the country, and some of the best universities in like places like Yale in the country. So the people that are growing up in this community are getting very well educated and then moving elsewhere. And I thought that Sono had the unique qualities to be a place where young people might want to actually migrate to and want to live. And the attributes that were particularly important for that demographic are connectivity to New York City. And this at this location, you can just hop on a train and be in New York. Diversity. This is a very diverse neighborhood with both along income based and culturally and ethnically. Authenticity. Sono's there's been a lot of work done to save his existing historic buildings. On this site, the building in the middle of the site where I have my office is a 24,000 square foot old mill building that's on the National Historic Register. It was the old Leroy Shirt Factory. And the history of that building is memorialized in the lobby to that building. And it just brings a lot more depth to the community. On the corner of Chestnut and Monroe Street, we just completed in August, September of last year, the platform, which is 106 residential units. And that property was remarkable in that it leased up, pretty much fully leased up between August and Christmas of last year. And now it's 100% leased. And it has, if you haven't been there, we'd love to get you down there for a tour, because it has a very dramatic co-working lobby space in the middle of the building that's that faces out to Chestnut Street. That's been a major factor in the lease up. Also, the fact that we did an indoor basketball court was a major surprise. There it was a surprise in that the basketball court gets used for hours every day, and it's just nice to see that kind of activity going on Chestnut Street. So that in the slide that's in front of you, it's Chestnut Street at the and Monroe Street at the right side, with the roadway into the railroad station there. What we're proposing is as part of the grant is to totally redo that road into the station. Right now, it's somewhat of a mess in that there's very little organization there in terms of where taxis go, where buses go, where you drop people off, and the parking itself is not well organized. So this proposal would clean up all of that. Buses would be queued along the right-hand side next to where the station house is. There's room for approximately 7 buses to queue there, and then they can either turn around in a large turnaround and come back out to Monroe Street, or exit onto Henry Street. And then there's about 165 parking spaces that will be in the reconfigured lot just to the south of that circle. And between that roadway and our proposed project is a new outdoor plaza area that would be about 8,500 square feet of area. And we're going to take advantage, we're going to work with the city to make sure that that's a very active place. We're trying to get a brewery into the building right adjacent to this space with the to be an anchor for this development, and to be another reason for people to get off the train in Sono and have a destination in mind, and hopefully wander from there out to the other restaurants and whatnot on Washington Street. Additionally, there's a plaza area between the existing building, the historic building at 11 Chestnut Street, and the new building. That's a 50-foot wide by 200-foot long plaza area where, if we get the brewery that we're hoping to, we want to allow food trucks to be in that area and open for business. And it's another way of incubating small businesses in the area. So Matt, if you want to go to the next slide. So this is, in this slide, Chestnut Street is off to the right, and it shows the vehicular drop off into the project. We've got 3 levels of parking to accommodate the parking for this project, as well as the 60 spaces that of public parking that's included. So there's a total of 287 spaces that will be part of this project. Along in this slide, Henry Street is along the bottom, and we've got townhouses that are facing onto Henry Street, which will really drop the scale of the building down and make it more compatible with the 3-story homes that are across the street and further down Chestnut Street in the neighborhood. You want to go to the next? This is the this is the level at the train station level. We've got at the top in an orange or reddish color. That's where we were seeing the brewery, which would be on both on the upper level and go down into that lower plaza too. We also have about 3,000 square feet of transit-oriented retail. That's where people could drop off their dry cleaning and or get prepared meals to bring home. There's a whole assortment of small businesses that congregate around train stations that Norwalk hasn't really well served in the past. Next slide. In the upper levels of the project, wrap around a courtyard that would be an amenity for the residents here. This features a pool, and it would have an outdoor grill areas, and perhaps we're talking about a putting green and other just lounge areas. We can, but that would be a major outdoor amenity space for the residents. Go on to the next. So this is just going up through the upper floors of the building. It's this shows where the upper portion of the building is set back behind the townhouses, so that when you're at street level, you don't really see the upper story. Next. And then this is the again, upper floor with the units wrapping around. These are the exterior elevations of the building. I don't think we need to go through these because we've got some exterior views that are a little more telling. So this is a view up Henry Street with the townhouses off to the right. They're set back so they have individual garden areas that help to create a little privacy for those units from the street, and and green up the street. Next. This is a view corner of Henry Street and Chestnut Street. The architecture along Chestnut is similar to the platform at 1 Chestnut Street. We just thought that we would continue that the brick vocabulary down the street as just a comfortable way of starting and finishing that block. This is a earlier view. The architecture's changed here a little bit, but the idea for the lower courtyard with the food trucks and the outdoor spaces that would potentially be associated with the brewery shows the kind of vitality that we're looking for here.
Great. And the connection here from the lower courtyard up to the train station level.
And then this is the upper courtyard. This was the architecture's changed here a little bit, but the idea is to make this a very vital node in South Norwalk. This developer architect combination was responsible for the courtyard at Ironworks, which played a very positive role in anchoring the Washington Street Historic District and added vitality there at a point in history back in 2015 or so where the neighborhood was pretty stressed. And but with the residential influx that's happened in the neighborhood since then, I think that the community's gotten a little healthier in terms of the fragile ecology of the businesses on Washington Street. But they definitely benefit from having more people living in the area. So that's the overview of the project architecturally. Should we open it up for questions?
If I could, just real quick, thanks, Bruce. And I appreciate it. Just one caveat in terms of the design. Obviously, what we're looking at today is from a conceptual level, and this has still to do with all the entitlements, land use, and design review processes. So we want to just kind of show some palette, of options that are being thought of, but there's still, a robust process that'll follow.
Just a couple of questions. So in terms of what we're being asked to approve tonight, the license agreement, as I understand it, that's to let the Spinnaker get on to do environmental testing. Is that correct?
Yeah, to perform their, more invasive due diligence if that's needed, taking a look at environmental conditions, also assist their site planning efforts. And one of the things too that we've talked about, and it's at the developer's discretion, is if they want to pursue at their own cost, concurrent approval. So we basically just authorizing that, we approve this in concept and you have access to the site to do what you need to do to pull together your plans.
Okay. So the next question is, will that eliminate any of the parking? And if so, what's the plan?
Matt, can you speak to what the sort of program that you plan?
During the due diligence period, Mr. Livingston?
Yes.
Is that what you're from? Yeah, so at the most, I know the site's pretty well characterized from an environmental standpoint. The city and redevelopment have spent a decent amount of money over the years characterizing it. So we'll just kind of more administratively review that. And that may recommend some additional testing. If that's the case, it might be one day of a small rig out there doing a couple of testing, little borings that might probably in collaboration with the parking authority might have a couple spaces wherever the locations are that the borings would occur. Similarly, we may decide to test the soil condition structurally and have a geotechnical engineer do a similar process.
So just to be clear, you'll need to get approvals to eliminate any parking spots for any period of time? I mean, that should be in the license, right, Brian?
Yeah, and we can include that, and then we can make sure that that was specifically spelled out, but we'll make sure that that occurs.
Yeah. On the other item, which is the approval of the term, I guess it's to move forward on the LDA. Okay. You and I have talked about this extensively. I think it's I think you got it all. The devil's in the details, as we say. And I guess the only caution I have, you and I have talked about, is And as much as Spinnaker and Bruce and everybody's great and all that stuff, we have to use as our what not to do the POCO project, right? So that has to be, we have to make sure we do not fall in any of those traps.
Yeah, and a lot of lessons were learned, and it was the centerpiece of every discussion as we started this whole process. There's inherent risk to any development project. I would be lying if I said there wasn't, but it's all about the mitigation and what we could do to try to, help that.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you, Bruce, Brian, and Matt. I know many years of work went into this, and it definitely shows. I know we've been talking about it for quite some time, and I know there's a lot of pieces of this puzzle that needed to fit just right. And I'm personally pleased to see it finally at this point. So, if there are no other questions, I believe Mr. Livingston moved this item. I will now call for a vote. All in favor, please raise your hand and signify yes. Unanimous. Okay, now item C2, and that's to authorize city and redevelopment agency staff to commence negotiations of a land disposition and development agreement with Sono TOD2 LLC concerning the conveyance of a 46,107 square foot portion of 30 Monroe Street from the city to the developer of the development of a certain site being the city parcel combined with certain parcels that identified in the Norwalk tax assessor's land records as noted, owned by the developer, and to proceed on the basis of key terms presented in the Sono TOD2 LDA term sheet. Would someone like to move this item? Thank you, Ms. Smith. Brian, you want to speak to this?
No, this is just a follow-up item to permit us moving forward to draft the full LDA, which would be for the consideration, probably about a 3 to 4 month period is what we're targeting. But again, this is where we reconcile the details.
I know you got into it already, but any questions? Okay, seeing none, now we'll call for a vote. All in favor, please raise your hand and signify yes. Unanimous once again. Great. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And if there's no other business, wow, we're at the end. Can I get a motion? Thank you, Ms. Smith. All in favor? All right, everyone try to enjoy the rest of this beautiful Cinco de Mayo night.
Good night.
Shrimp tacos for everybody. Good night.